רעה מבשרך ואין רע אלא גהנם שמא וגם רשע ליום רע. וכאשר תנצל מן הכעס, when we are preserved from anger, תעלה על לבך מידת הענווה. That will bring us, hopefully we spoke last week about the connection with humility, שהיא מידה טובה מכל המידות טובות, מידות שנאמר עקב ענווה יראת השם, ובעבור הענווה תעלה על לבך מידס היראה. כי תיתן אל לבך תמיד מאין באת ולאן אתה הולך ושאתה רימה בתולעת בחייך קל ואף כי במעשיך. לפני מי אתה אסיר ליתן דין וחשבון לפני מלך הכבוד, שנאמר הנה השמיים ושמי השמיים לא יכלכלוך, אף כי ליבוס בני אדם, שנאמר והלא עשה השמיים ועשה הארץ אני מלאנו ומהשם. כאשר תחשוב כל אלה תראה, we will be in awe and in fear מבוראך from our creator ותשמור ותשמר מן החטא ובמידות האלה תהיה שמח בחלקך. Will also bring us to being happy with our lot. וכאשר תתנהג במידת הענווה להתבושש מכל אדם. We spoke about being the having shame and having the ability to feel shame in front of any human being. ולהתפחד ממנו from Hashem. ומן החטא אז תשרה עליך רוח השכינה וזיו כבודה וחיי עולם הבא. And we're up to now is ואתה בני, and now he says, now my son, da urei, know and see, ki hamitga'eh belibo al habriot, that someone who in his heart is arrogant over other people, and mitga'eh belibo moredhu b'malchut shamayim. He is in a way rebelling against God, ki mitpa'er hu bilvush malchut shamayim, because he is taking glory in God's clothing, in God's dominion. Shenema Hashem malach ge'ut lavesh. As the pasuk says, we say it in Kabbalat Shabbat, Hashem malach. God has rules over the world, is king over the world, and he robes himself and clothes himself in ge'ut, in what's the real knowledge that he is God, and he really is the only source of all these midot which we might be arrogant about. Before I get into the content of what exactly he's saying, I want to mention something which I think is important and significant. I look at the phrase "Va'ata b'ni," and he says, "And now, my son, da ure'eh." He says, "I'm telling you, da to know this, ure'eh, and look for it, and you'll see it yourself." And I think educationally, as a teacher, as parents, this is such an important lesson where the Ramban says, da ure'eh. He says, listen, I'm telling you this, but look for it and you'll see it yourself. You'll be able to see this phenomena that this is the way it is. And as we teach others, whoever it is we're teaching, whether it's a student or our children and our grandchildren, if we think of this phrase, I think it gives a certain, I don't know if it's empowering, but it's showing a certain kind of respect, so to speak, to the person who you're teaching, where you don't just say, here's the way it is. But if you think of a phrase to say to your students, or to say, look and see if you see it this way. Look at it yourself and come to it in a way, come to with yourself in a way. I'm saying it to you, but Re'eh, go out and see if this is so. If you think about students and who hear a teacher say this to them and say, go if you don't, tell me what you think. See if you see it this way. It in a way gives, not in the in a very modern way, was saying, oh, I have to, the teacher's not there as the purveyor of information. The teachers, everybody is just as good, and the students have what to say as much as the teacher has what to say. The extremes that society has taken things to, I think they're to extremes, but there is a real value, which we all know. I'm sure I'm not saying something which is a big chidush here, to show value and to respect the minds and the senses and the I guess I would say the perceptions that a student or a child has. And the phrase, when you think about it, da ure'eh, the Ramban is teaching us in those two short little words, I think a really important lesson in education. To say, look, I can just say, da, know this. This is this, I'm giving you the facts. But I'm saying, you're a smart kid. You see things, you're perceptive. Go and see if this isn't true. See if you see it this way. Here's I'm telling you, but see if you agree and you see this way, you see things this way as well. So before we get to the content of what he's saying, to be able, you discover it and you see it, that's really, I think, a really important lesson which the Ramban is teaching, and finding the balance. I think in our generation, where there's so much has moved to, as a teacher, and seeing in the people have had longer careers than I have had in education, where the teacher goes from being a purveyor of knowledge, the teacher stands up and lectures. And we've sort of gone certainly in some educational systems, in some schools, to the other extreme, where the teacher doesn't really have anything to say. The teacher is a facilitator. The teacher facilitates. The kids have just as much valuable to say as the teacher, which is also the extreme. It's interesting. Orot Etzion schools was, and I think Orot Etzion schools is not what it was 33 years ago when they were founded. But we're seeing, I don't know if there are more old-time Ephraimians here, but much more mirubah, or much more traditional. And we still are to some extent, have aspects of, the teacher comes and there needs to be discipline. The teacher gives the knowledge to the kids. That's the old school. Whereas now it's moved a little bit, again, we've moved also from that. And I think there's something positive in it. You can go to an extreme where the teacher is just again, a facilitator. The teacher should have knowledge in the subject that they're teaching, more knowledge than the students have, be able to bring facts and information and ideas and ways of thinking to the kids, which the teacher brings. But we also want to give the kids the ability to discover something that you learn through discovery. And I think it's built into our religion. The whole idea of chavrusa learning is where people study the tutorial system, where they study with each other and discover the learning. And what they say in the old yeshivas, you make a laning on the Gemara. You sit and you try to figure it out yourselves. There's tremendous value in that. But there's also value, and we shouldn't lose sight of getting, of learning from the teacher. Yes, someone has something to say.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I agree with you. And I'm grateful that we at least have Zoom, but I would say Zoom is one of these challenges right now. You want the kids to be able to participate but you can't really do that as easily with Zoom, as you well know, because you're teaching a lot of classes like that. I think that's sort of like put a limit on how much interaction teachers can have with the students right now. I see it with my own grandchildren. They're feeling it. They like to express themselves, or you hear something the teacher's saying, and just because of the realities of Zoom, you can't have people just talking back and forth. It becomes very, very distracting. It's just not the
Absolutely.
feel of being in a classroom.
No,
So
no,
we
I
have to
think,
be understanding of the kids. Yeah.
yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think that's one of the difficulties and one of the real challenges with Zoom. I mean, we see it in this class where where it's not kids, where it's adults, and I hope that people like you just did, I've had people that have something to say. I certainly want to hear it, but it's tough when you're running a virtual classroom where you want to
Yes.
give the kids an opportunity, and it ends up being a lot more lecture, less interactive, less
Right.
kids interacting with each other. I would, as a teacher, and I love teaching. I love teaching Gemara always my whole life, and I did in whatever school. Even when I was principal, but to facilitate interaction between the kids, I'm using the word facilitate. So I guess I was sort of also a little bit of a facilitator. A kid raises their hand and has something to say, and I would say, you have a question or a thought, tell it to your neighbor, or I pose a question, you have an answer, well, you tell him your answer, and you have an answer, you tell him your answer, and
Right.
that way to get the kids to interact. And it's so difficult to do that. Zoom is,
Yes.
I think people are abgezoomt, as they say in Yiddish, but no question, there's no question about it. All right, I just thought that was
Rav Moshe,
yeah.
I wanted to ask you, just going back to the concept of anava, would you say that bitul hayesh and anava and shval ruach are really synonyms? And if not, how would you differentiate between them? Is it degrees of the same thing? Is it
Wow.
more ben adam lechavero or ben adam lamakom?
I think the answer to everything you're saying is yes. I think that there are many dimensions. The Rambam seems to say shval ruach is more like it might be an issue of degrees, but I think when we talk about anava, again, my thinking is yours is as good as mine on this, if not better. But I think there are different. Not just levels of anava, but there are different avenues to anava. Does anava require, for instance, us, and I think we'll see this because he's going to talk about it more, but does it require me to deny what I have or who I am and to just make nothing? Moshe Rabbeinu was anav mikol adam. If you approached Moshe Rabbeinu and said, Moshe, you're Moshe Rabbeinu, you went up to Har Sinai, God gave you the Torah, you led the people, you were God's shaliach to take the people out, you spoke to Hashem panim el panim. So what would Moshe have responded? Nah, it wasn't me, it was my brother, it was someone else, you must be mistaken. He knew what he was, he knew what he had, but he also knew that the source was God. And so anava, and you say bitul hayesh, is in a way, it seems like there are two different avenues of reaching maybe a goal. Sometimes I can be anava and realize, well, the whole thing, I have all these things, but is it really important? Are these things really, I'm a wealthy person. So I'm not going to deny that I have that, but I recognize that everything comes from God. I recognize also how flimsy everything is and how really unimportant it is. There's anava, as you say, which I think is absolutely true. Is anava in terms of, he's going to talk about it, so we'll get to some of these, I think, but anava toward God, anava toward other people. Anava toward God is complete. We stand before God without a shred of anything, but we're just complete anava, a puny being who's dependent on God for for everything that we have, and we are so insignificant as compared to him. With other people, we talk about, having a certain element of self-worth and self-value. I guess it's not that we shouldn't have that with God, but and even to keep our personal dignity with in dealings with other people. So, I think you're asking good questions. I don't know, and I imagine that different people would give different answers to it. We know, and maybe we've talked about before, the different schools of Musar. And everybody values anava because the scriptures value anava. So one cannot deny the value of anava. But we talk about the different schools. It's often characterized the school of Nevardak and the school of Slabodka in the school of Musar, where the Nevardak really built and pushed this issue of the shiflus ha'adam, as you said, that man is, what am I worth? I'm a nothing. Ich bin a garnet, as the old joke goes. I'm just a nothing. I'm not worth anything. And they would do all sorts of things, according to the books and the stories, to really degrade themselves. And in a way, we don't think about another as degrading ourselves. Really, especially if we think, I recognize who I am, but I recognize it comes from God. But they felt that there was, we in order to fight and to build the anava, they would do things which it's hard for some of us probably to relate to. It's hard for me to relate to, putting yourself in a situation. They would say they would go into, a store which sold, food, and they would ask for a pound of nails. So the person, what are you, an idiot? What are you coming in here? We're a food store. We don't sell nails. And they would degrade them. And the Nevardikers, the old time Nevardikers, would revel in this. They would get pleasure out of the fact that they would put themselves in a situation where people would start to debase and degrade them. Very hard for us to relate to that. It's also hard for us to relate to, because in America, this doesn't work, because you go into America and Israel, you go into CVS, or Target, they have everything. So if you ask for a pound, we have that. We have food too. We have groceries. We have fruit and vegetables and frozen chicken. So the whole thing didn't work once with Costco. But it's very hard for us to relate to degrading ourselves in this kind of way. Slabodka, and I'll give you 1 second, but Slabodka was a much different, Slabodka and the Chevron Yeshiva was an heir to this kind of thought. It was Gadlus Ha'adam, was building up the person. Man is so chashuv, and people, the human being is so valuable and chashuv. How can you do this? It was building up. They dressed in a way which was machshiv themselves. Again, not because they didn't recognize another, but they had a different way of getting to this avodas Hashem. So it's complex. Yes, you wanted to say something.
I just wanted to say, when you taught us Shmona Pratim LaRambam, I think that you were always talking about the golden mean Shvil HaZahav. I would say that comes in here. In other words, to make yourself shafel, okay, but you still have to have self-respect, and because you are Tzelem Elokim, and the Navardic way sounds rather drastic. I'm not judging it. I wasn't there, but I think, like you taught us, there has to be a middle way.
Yeah, I think so too. Although the Rambam himself says, and I think last week I showed it to you, where the Rambam says when it comes to anger and it comes to humility, a person should not practice necessarily the middle way, but should go more to the extreme. And again, whether that's really the ideal or whether it's because these midot are so dangerous, that the Rambam himself says that we should be careful about the middle way. Let's continue, because I maybe he's going to talk more about anava. So he says again, Da'ura'eh, he says, you should know that if someone is arrogant, he's in a way, we're pushing the footstool of God, so to speak. It's God, where, God, an arrogant person and God, there's no room for both of us in this town, basically. Shenemar Hashem malach geut lavesh. The word geut is an interesting, word. Hashem is ki ga'o ga'ah. Similar words in Hebrew, geut ga'ava. Ubega'avato shechakim in Parashat Zot HaBracha. Ga'avat is also, there's ga'ava, there's ge'eh, there's the word ga'on. All these words come from a similar shoresh, which means something which is raised high, and a feeling of over others, is the word ge'ah. And then he goes on and says, and if you think about it, what do we have to be arrogant about? In be'osha, if it is in wealth, Hashem morishu ma'ashir. Hashem gives wealth, and morish, rash is a poor person. Hashem can change a person's, and I don't have to give examples. We've seen examples in our lifetimes of people who fall in a moment, people who were fabulously wealthy and go from that to abject poverty in literally a second. And in the kavod, and if it's an honor, halol elokimhu. Now here he doesn't say God could take away our honor. He said, really, all honor is not something. Honor is something which, in essence, there's nothing to be angry about, nothing to be arrogant about. He says, if it's wealth, well, wealth, you have it. But he says, kavod itself, it's flawed to make a thing out of kavod. Kavod is not real, but you can get kavod because of various things. But why would you be arrogant about the kavod you receive? You get kavod because of something, but the kavod itself is nothing, is not worth anything. Shanemar ha'oshev ha'kavod milfanecha is before ve'ech mitpa'er b'chvod kono. And how should we glory ourselves with the kavod of which it really belongs to God, which is really God's. Ve'imit ba'er b'chokhma, and if it's wisdom, say, okay, I'm a smart guy. I have this IQ. I have got this grade on my SATs. I went to this and this university. Imit ba'er b'chokhma mesir safa v'ne'emanim. God could take away the ability to speak. V'ta'am zekenim yikach. Even wisdom could be here today and gone tomorrow. Everything is really equal. God is the great equalizer. He can lower those people who are high up, and he can raise those who are low. Therefore, he says, Hashpel atzmecha v'yinasucha hamakom. We should lower ourselves, and then God will worry for our kavod, and God can raise us up. We don't need to, we shouldn't be doeg to raise ourselves up. It's reminiscent of the word which I once heard. It's very, very cute. It's more than cute. I think it's very meaningful. It says, Kol ha-rodef achar ha-kavod. Kavod rodef mipanav. Anybody who runs after kavod runs away from him. And everyone, and kol ha-rodef mipnei ha-kavod. And anyone who runs away from kavod, kavod rodef acharav. The kavod will run after him. So we should run away from kavod, so the kavod runs after us. So I once heard, that's a chazal. That's a chazal. So I once heard, I forgot who asks the question, a very sharp question, says, well, what's the difference? Both of these people are the same distance from the kavod. It's somebody who runs after kavod. Kavod is always a few steps ahead of him. Somebody who's running away from kavod is always a few steps behind. So they're both in the same situation, basically, either running away or running toward the kavod. So again, I forgot who, I wish I'd remember where I saw this, but it's a beautiful idea. It says, you know when the difference comes? The difference comes when you become too old to run. When you become too old to run, the kavod will catch up with you if you're running away from it. And if you're running toward the kavod, you'll lag behind, and it'll be far away from you. So people who live their lives not looking after kavod, hopefully we call it the kavod acharon, when a person is able to reach the kavod, or to have the kavod reach them when they become too old to run away from the kavod. But the idea is that God controls what we have, and what should we really be arrogant about, and what should we take pride in when God could change things in a moment. And it's not just that God gives us that everything that I have, that I get from God, and I recognize, and I think this is so significant to recognize that, Anava doesn't realize, and you asked before, what is Anava and how do we understand it? Is it the same thing as this? I don't think it's denying, I don't think we're ever asked to deny reality in our religion. And if a person knows, I'm smart, I'm wealthy, I'm good at this, and I paint well, or I do this well, I don't think we're supposed to downgrade, and it would be self-deprecating, on everything that we have. I think it means really to recognize that God is the source, and God gives me the ability, and maybe I developed that ability and I get some credit for it. But in the final analysis, it all comes from God, and it could be removed in any second. I think I shared with you once, I think it's a beautiful idea, but maybe sometime when we learn Tehillim, I shared it with you. I'll say it again because I think it's a beautiful idea from Rav Stavsky. It says in Tehillim, which we say in Hallel, it says, Hayam ra'av hayanos, hayardein yisov le'achor, haharim rakedu che'elim, givaos kivnei tzon. It says the sea ran away, the Yarden runs away, and the Yarden, so Haharim, and the mountains and the Givaot also are trembling and are rocking in pachad, in fear, in awe. Why are you afraid? Why is the sea and the Jordan River? Why are you so fearful? And why are the mountains and valleys trembling and quaking in fear? In front of God. It's because of the recognition of God's awesomeness that the sea is fleeing and that the mountains are quaking. Listen to the last words of the parak. He who can change, who can transform, exactly what the Ramban is saying here. He can change in a second. agam mayim. He will change the rock, the stone, to a sea of water. Chalamish, a hard stone, also lemaino mayim, to water. He can change the stone to water in a second. That's the God. So asks Rav Soloveitchik in his brilliance. He says that's a reason for the stones to be afraid. Hahofchi hatzur agam mayim. That's why it's because God can change the stone to water. Chalamish, stone, l'mayno mayim. So that explains why the stones are afraid. That doesn't explain why the water is afraid, why the water is fleeing. And explains Rav Soloveitchik that, I don't know if it's written somewhere, but I heard it years ago from Rav Soloveitchik in his name, that it's not only humbling to know that whatever we think, that whatever we are, God can take it away in a moment, as the Ramban says here in Igeras Ramban. Not only is that humbling, but it's also humbling to know that that which I think makes me special, that I have, which is unique to me, God could make somebody else me as well. It's not just humbling to the rocks to know that God can transform them in a moment into water, but it's humbling for the water to know that in a moment, God can make the rocks into water as well. So it's humbling to know that, oh, this is me, I'm special, I'm unique. God could have made you me. God could have made me you. Everything which I think is so special, that I am so unique, it's only because of God that I have that. Something else, not just he could take it away from me in a moment. That's one important humbling thought. But that you can be me. And maybe in some ways you are and have the uniqueness that I think I'm special. You have in a different way that uniqueness as well. That's also a humbling thought. I always liked that idea very much, which I heard. And another insight and another facet to the midah of humility. When we talk about God's how God can take away something in a moment, I think of Rav Soloveitchik also because my father, I think I've shared before. I know other people also have dealt with this and are dealing with this. My mom has Alzheimer's, and my father years ago he got a certain, I don't know, but a certain comfort. Rav Soloveitchik Zatzal, whatever kind, whether he had Alzheimer's or also some kind of dementia that he had. And, my father said, if a great mind like Rav Soloveitchik, if this can happen to him. So again, it gave my father a certain amount of solace or comfort. And he would sort of take from that. But this idea certainly, which the Ramban is saying in Geras, that anything which we have can be taken away in a moment, whether it's wealth, whether it's intellect, is so significant, I think, to all of us. Let's continue as our time runs short, and I don't want to end on time. The kasher, al-kain, and therefore, and people look at this as almost a break or a second part of the Igeres. Al-kain, therefore, he talks a little more practically. I will explain to you how to act with humility. To always go within the midah of humility. Let's read a little bit. Kol dvarecha yeyu benachas, as he said earlier. Speak calmly. Speak calmly. V'roshcha kafuf, and not with a head held up high in an arrogant fashion. Kafuf is slightly bent. Kfifa. Halachof ke'agmon roshecha, pasuk in Navi. Ve'enecha yabitu lemata, and one should look more down, la'aretz, ve'libcha lemala, beautiful expression. Your eyes looking down, but your heart raised heavenward, raised up. Your heart always being lamala. The af also, it says in tefillah, a person should daven that way with their eyes down but their heart up. The al tabit b'fnei adam b'dabercha imo, and not to look a person in the eye when you speak with them. Now it's interesting what he says here, because in our society, what do we always tell people? You look at me when I'm talking to you, right? It's not seen respectful to do this. It's culturally. I remember someone telling me years ago that, and different cultures, they're different. When someone is in American culture, if somebody is giving you a rebuke, if the teacher or principal is talking to you, and you're not looking at them, sometimes they'll say to you, look at me when I'm talking to you. In certain cultures, and clearly where the Ramban is talking, it was not respectful. Now, there's a way to look a person in the eye, which is brazen. It's a little, don't look. We all know what's accepted and not what's acceptable and accepted and respectful and not respectful. And I think the Ramban would agree that there are cultural norms in terms of what's expected. But not to look in a brazen way, and not to look up, and sometimes to look down. But certainly in our society, not to look at someone. And how many times do we say, or does a teacher say, look at me when I'm talking to you, or look at me when I'm talking to you. And it's interesting because I was just, I don't know if anybody, I'm sure some of you, people who have been involved in education in some way, there was a workshop, teacher's workshop, which was very popular in the, I think, early 1990s or 1980s, and it's still available on YouTube. It's not a great audio, but I looked at it recently. It's called Fat City. F is F.A.T. I don't know what it stands for exactly, city, and by an educator of a well-known guy named Richard Lavoie. And he, really brought to light the issue of learning disabilities and kids sitting in classrooms. It's a fascinating, if anyone has the time to see this this video, if you can make it out. And he sits with a group of adults, educators, doctors, people from all different kinds of professions. And he shows them what it's like for a kid with learning disabilities to be sitting in a classroom and have to deal with what's going on, and not seeing things or reading things, and really giving the sense and the feel of what the kids are going through this adults. It's very well done. And one of the things he does, and some of the stuff is for kids who have take longer to process, things which we now recognize more, which with the kids who got in trouble and were fidgety and whatever. And he really shows it. It's excellent if anyone has the time to see it. But one of the things he shows, he starts asking questions, and he asks a question which the people don't know, and they look down. And he says, "Okay, who knows? You know this answer." And people are looking. These are adults sitting in the class as kids, and they're looking down. And he says, "You see this? Look at yourselves. I'm asking you something that you don't know, and you're looking down, because that's our natural response. And yet, what's the response of a teacher? Look at me. Look at me when I'm talking to you." So we're putting the kid in a more difficult situation. So I just thought of that. It's not exactly what the Ramban is talking about here, but he says the body language, he recognizes the Ramban, and he's teaching us that we should have a body language also which conveys anava. And he continues, and he says, V'chol adam yiyeh gadol mimcha be'einecha. And he says, every person should be greater than you in your eyes. Zim chacham o ashiru, if he's smart or wealthy, alecha lechabdo, you should honor him. V'im rashu, and if he's poorer than you, v'ata ashir o chacham mimenu, and you are wealthier or smarter than him, then chashov b'libcha, think in your heart, ki ata chayav mimenu, v'hu zakay mimcha. Maybe you've used up your zechuyot. Maybe he has certain zechuyot in his favor. She'imu chotehu shogeg va'ata mezid. And also because you have an ability, maybe he's less capable. And therefore, he's not as smart, and he doesn't get it, and he doesn't have the means. And therefore, you should recognize that. Now, I don't think the Ramban is saying, because again, I don't think we're ever told to deny reality, that look at every single person in the world, that they are better than you. I think what he's saying, which I think is a really, really good lesson, so they say, every book you can read, you can get something out of. Every book that you read, there's some lesson. There's something in that book that you didn't know. And you say, I know this book, I have it, it's simple, I don't agree. There's one thing in that book that you can get. You can see, look, the way he did this, the way he wrote this. Maybe it's the way he ordered the table of contents. Maybe it's the way he annotated it. Maybe it's this one idea. Every person has something which I can learn from. I think that's what he's saying. There is every person should have something where you can say, there is something that this person has that I can learn from, that I don't have, that the person is better than me. And I think that's what the Ramban is saying. And that's a lesson which I think, to relate to say, I'm supposed to live my life and say, basically, I'm the lowest person on the planet. The Ramban is not saying that. I think what he's saying is that we need to be able to look and see and say there is something, the kol adam, that every single human being, that every single person has, which I can learn from. And that kind of thing, as it says in Pirkei Avos, halomed kol adam, ezehu chacham, halomed kol adam, that's in line with our Chazal, which to understand, there's every person, and it's true. If we really think about it, there's nobody who we can't look at and say, there's something admirable, there's something there, there's something I want to gain from. I want to end because I'm going to end. I want to give you a couple of minutes. I don't want to flow from one to the other. Someone said I don't give a break, so I want to give a break. I'm sorry, it's not much of a break, but I wanted to mention it before. Actually, I don't know those. And my last position, which I had, was working in the Hebrew Academy of Nassau County in Long Island, was the principal of a high school there. And I got to know someone who was a really, truly wonderful, great person. His name was Rav Yehuda Kellemer. He was the rabbi of the Young Israel of West Hempstead since 1983. A wonderful man and a big Talmud Chacham. And it was it was an honor for me to get to know him and work with him the years that I was there. And he was nifter just, Levaya was yesterday. Unfortunately, he was not well. Yeah, I don't know if people had heard this, but he was hit by a car a couple of years ago. He recovered from that. He was sick again recently, and the Levaya was yesterday. And I listened to a good part of the Levaya, and someone said something which was so beautiful, which I'll just share with you. It has to do with something we said before, but I'll just say it in a minute or two because it was just so beautiful. He said the pasuk in Shir Hashirim, Dodi li va'ani lo haro'eh bashoshanim. That I am my beloved is for me, he shepherds through the roses, bashoshanim, lilies or roses, whether it's Shoshana is a rose or not, I'm not going to get into. Haro'eh bashoshanim. So someone quoted, I think it was in the name of the Alter of Slobodka, that there are all different kinds of leaders. But, the Ro'et Matz Haro'eh bashoshanim, who leads me, who shepherds me amongst the roses, that there are some leaders that shepherd the sheep, that they put down petals of sweet-smelling flowers, of roses, and the sheep follow. That's the way he gets them to follow him. And by putting down, that's haro'eh. I never heard this before. It's a beautiful idea. Haro'eh bashoshanim, to lead people with shoshanim, to lead people with sweet-smelling flowers. Allow them to come through the path, in the right path, through a path of sweet-smelling flowers, because they want to follow the sweet-smelling flowers. And he spoke about that's really the kind of leader that Rabbi Kellemer was. And it's a lesson for all of us to try to lead through Haroeh Bashoshanim, to try to lead with sweet smelling flowers. Hope everyone stays healthy, remains healthy. At least I'll give you 2 minutes to get
Thank you very
a
much.
coffee.
Thank you.
Sei gesund.
Thank you.
Thank
Be
you.
well. Thank you all. Thank you all.
Stay well.
Stay healthy. Stay
Stay
well.
well.